Hello, everyone. My name is Sapa, and I'm the Executive Director of Roots Connected. We are so honored to be offering our family workshop series, and we're ever more committed to the mission of our ongoing work as an organization. Roots Connected is a national professional development organization for educators and school leaders committed at its core to ensuring that each child recognize the humanity in one another. Drawing from over a decade of practice in a racially and economically diverse school, we support schools across the country in practices of anti-bias education, and we believe firmly that from a young age, children should be taught concepts of justice and should learn history from multiple perspectives. We believe that schools should be places where children belong, where they're seen, and where they're taught to think critically. We believe that schools as institutions should be in the practice of interrogating racist systems and should be in the constant work of freedom and liberation, teaching kids to see one another as humans. And in the last few months, as the homeschool wall has disappeared, this is the first time that we've been able to offer our services to families. And we're really humbled to have you join us as part of that work. There is obviously no one way to do this, and as humans are varied, so are the experiences and conversations we have with our children. But what we have tried to do is take over a decade of learning in a school where conversations with children are normalized and coupled with facilitators with a collective of over 30 years in working with children both as parents and educators, in the hopes that this can be of some support in your own families. We also recognize that none of this can be easily packaged in a 60-minute presentation, and therefore see this workshop as a launching point for a series of workshops to follow. I am so incredibly grateful for these colleagues of mine who have become some of my nearest and dearest friends in this work, who have agreed to share their thinking and experience with all of you for the next hour. I'll pass it on to Sophie, Michelle, and Susan.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I have taught 5th grade at Community Roots for 3 years, and an important part of my experience in the classroom has been teaching Black history. So I've spent a good amount of time having hard conversations with kids about race and racism on a daily basis. And, for myself as a mixed race Black person who grew up outside of the US and whose Blackness was never really tied to the US before I moved here not long ago, it's been a journey for me as I've been tasked with teaching a diverse group of kids about race and racism in America. So a lot of my learning has been around race in America has been done as an adult, despite my own racial identity. And so that has been really fascinating. And I've seen firsthand how kids can be a catalyst for that learning. And then on the flip side, how they also depend on us to do that learning and unlearning and relearning so that we can teach them. So for that reason, I'm so excited to be here and honored that my colleagues and I get to share with you some of the things we've learned about having these conversations with kids. So I'll pass it on to Michelle now.
Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Harris. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have a master's degree in child development, and I've spent the last 15 years providing play therapy to children and working with families and supporting them in a variety of settings. I am currently the director of elementary school social work at a progressive K to 8th grade school in Brooklyn, New York. And this coming school year will actually be my 11th year on their social work team. And I'm also the founder of Parenting Pathfinders, which is a consulting service that provides parents and caregivers with online support and practical tools that are rooted in mindfulness and really build upon each family's strengths. And I'm also a mama of 2 amazing little humans who really inspire me and really fuel me in this work. Because, I believe that they deserve to live in a world where they don't have to be afraid of something happening to them or someone that they love because they're Black. And the more anti-racism conversations that are had and the more comfortable families can be like having these conversations, I just think that the better the world's going to be for all of our kids. And I think that home is one of the best places to start creating the changes that you really want to see in the world. And so I'm just so grateful to be able to be here with all of you today and just for this opportunity to support more families and having conversations about race and racism. And I'll pass it to Susan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Park. This is my 17th year teaching. My expertise mostly lies within the lower elementary school. I've been a third grade teacher and currently I am a kindergarten teacher. And I do this work because most of my childhood and my upbringing has been centered on me being invisible and me doing whatever I possibly could to go unnoticed and fit in and blend in. And that's no way to live for any child. It's not what I want for my students. It's not what I want for my own kids. And so I would love to play a small part in having kids want to be seen and heard and them feeling welcomed in their communities and feel a sense of belonging. Also, as a mom of three, I've unfortunately had to bear witness to their first and then multiple encounters with racism. And as a parent, that never gets easy and it always feels quite painful. And so I also do this work because it helps to inform me as a parent and it helps to affirm the choices that I'm making, as well as give me time to pause and reflect and think about other ways that I can support my kids. So it's lovely to join you all this afternoon.
So this is our agenda for the workshop today. This is a tier 1 workshop, and there's a whole slew of tier 2 workshops that are available that we'll talk about later. But I think it's important to reiterate, as it's been said, that it would be impossible to cover everything that we wanted to cover in an hour, and that this work, I think that's reflective of the fact that this work is ongoing. So this is set up to be more of a foundational workshop with a second round. And I'll give you a second now to look over the agenda.
So we want to acknowledge that talking about racism, whether it's your own experience or someone else's, can be really hard. And it's normal to feel discomfort when talking about racial inequality. And as President Barack Obama stated in his quote, "Fear, uncertainty, and discomfort are your compasses towards growth." So we want to encourage you to think of, feeling uncomfortable and just being willing to sit in that feeling of discomfort as proof that you're growing. Right? We want to encourage you to be vulnerable and to be honest and to really strive to create, brave spaces where kids feel safe asking their questions. So before talking to children about race and racism, it's important that we have an understanding of these words and what they mean so that we can help them to understand. And it's also important for us just to have a common definition of race and racism as we move forward together today. And the definitions that I'm going to share with you are actually definitions that we use in our kindergarten through 5th grade classrooms. And so race can be defined this way, that we're all part of the human race. But over time, a new idea on race was created. And people began grouping others as part of a certain race based on where they were from, what they look like, their skin color, and the cultural practices that they had. Racism can be defined like this, as not just the expression of hateful words or actions based on race or prejudice, which are judgments that we make based on generalizations, but racism is a system of advantages and disadvantages based on race. And it's a system that operates to the advantage of white people and to the disadvantage of people of color. And it's so important for kids to have a full understanding and a full definition of racism, because fighting racism requires both that inner work for individual people to do, but also systems work that has to be taken on by entire communities. And so parents often wonder if it's too early to talk to their kids about race and racism. And we are here to tell you that it is never too early, because kids see differences and kids see race. And just like they see the ways that all the other things in the world aren't the same, skin color is no different. And there's ample research that shows that not only do babies see racial differences, but they develop racial biases and preferences really early on, often as young as like 6 to 9 months. And so from this chart, you can see that research shows that by 3 months, children can racially categorize people. By 3 years, children can express explicit forms of racial bias. By 5, children of color are conscious of existing racist stereotypes about their group and are negatively affected by them. And by 8, white kids learn that it is socially unacceptable to express explicit forms of racial bias and instead exhibit an increase in implicit forms of prejudice. And so what's just really important about this chart is both how early children's racial biases develop and also just how early their awareness of the impact of these biases develop as well. And so this just highlights just how crucial it is for families to have conversations about race and racism early and often.
So some of you might have seen this before. This is something that is called an identity web. And we believe strongly that before you engage in conversations with others about race or racism, whether it be with your partner or your friends or your colleagues or your children, that it is critical that we start with our first and foremost by thinking about ourselves and our identity. So I'm going to ask you all to really find a piece of paper around you, grab a pen, and fill this out for yourself and think about your different identifiers, because we are going to refer back to it in just a moment. We're not going to be sharing this in any public way. This is just a personal exercise. So go ahead and do that now. So this here is a visual representation of a theoretical framework called intersectionality, which was first coined by somebody named Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a professor and a civil rights advocate. And although these are just some of the social and cultural categories that can make up someone's identity, this gives us enough space to consider places in which we hold power and places where there's an absence of power. And each strand then carries with it a different level of power and thus positionality. And all of these identifiers are overlapping and interconnected, which means that when we walk into a space, when we walk into a conversation, we walk in with our whole selves, for better or for worse, depending on the context. And when you are filling out this identity web for yourselves, we want you to take a time to reflect. What did you or did you not include? And why might that be? Which of your identities have been rewarded and affirmed by society, and which have been subjugated to prejudice and or discrimination? Now, I want to share that I've done that identity web a slew of times, and without fail, the first thing that I write on my paper is my race. And it took me a while to understand for myself that that's not even because I necessarily feel so personally connected to it, but it's because living in this country, it's what others have deemed to be the most visible when they see me. And it's what others have used predominantly when defining who I am. So that's something to consider, that some of these identifiers are visible and some of them are invisible. And so again, that could help us or hurt us depending on the context that we're finding ourselves in. And I also want to share with you how intersectionality can play out within the context of me just walking my dog. So me just walking my dog is always just something that I have to do, right? But walking my dog during this time of COVID, this pandemic, has been something entirely different, because once this got seen by some as the Chinese virus, and as I started hearing about the hate crimes against the Asian community all over, including the city in which I live, things got real and things got real scary. And I immediately stopped asking my children to join me outside. And I can really remember, you know, feeling my heart beating fast as I'm bending over, tying my shoes, and going over a mental checklist of reminding myself, what am I going to say? What am I going to do if X, Y, or Z happens to me on that walk? And that's part of my identity. And it's something that I have to just experience and go through. Conversely, as a heterosexual cisgender woman, I can also walk my dog, and this time I can be with my husband and my 3 kids. And I can extend my hand and hold my husband's hand. And I have the privilege of having a non-eventful walk, which means I don't for 1 second need to think about getting any dirty looks or any discriminatory remarks when they see me and my husband. Right? I don't have to worry as a mom of protecting my kids, of them possibly hearing from a stranger of an attack on their parents or their family. That is a privilege that I own, and it is something that I just live with, that I have. And so within my one identity, but my overlapping identities, they're all steeped in varying levels of power and positionality. And if we could get ourselves to be more mindful of our own intersectionality and those of others, it completely changes the way that we do walk into a room and the way that we do engage in conversations, for us to be aware of the ways that certain topics or things can affect us and the ways that oppression can be experienced by ourselves and others. Sophie's going to share with you another visual representation called the Pyramid of Hate.
So I find this visual really helpful, as it shows how hate can evolve. Often we're looking at the very top of the pyramid, and that's where we focus because that's what we see. But when we look at the top of the pyramid, it can be really hard for us to think about how we can achieve change or where we can even start if that's our sole focus. Because we see heinous acts of hate like genocide, murder, assault, in the media and all around us, and we can begin to feel pretty helpless. And it's easy for us to personally disengage at that point when we feel helpless. And it's easy for us to not really have to confront our own possible complicitness within systemic racism if we start at the top of the pyramid. But the pyramid of hate is just that, it's a pyramid, and the top of the pyramid rests on its foundation, which is biased attitudes. And that's made up of our everyday thoughts and actions. And this shows us that this is where hateful actions take root. They take root in our biased actions and attitudes. So this is what we need to take a closer look at what this is made up of. So this is what's actually in the locus of our control. This is where we really need to sit, as uncomfortable as it may be, and start to undo our biases. And as we work towards undoing them, we're also modeling that for our kids. So as parents, there's lots of things that you're trying to instill in your children, whether it's wanting to share or working hard, working together with other kids. And the way that they learn those things is really from you showing them examples of it and modeling it for them. So it's no different with undoing our biased attitudes. Our children need to see how we do it and how we model it for them. So that might mean you might say something like, when I was little, I thought blank, or I was raised to believe that blank. But now I realize, and talk to them about how you've grown, and like narrate out loud for them how you replace those harmful thought processes in your own mind. And by modeling that, you're helping them to think critically about their own thought processes and not to just take for granted like stereotypes that maybe they've inherited from society. And this is where doing an activity like what Susan showed us is really helpful, because you might be thinking, like, great, I know I shouldn't have biased attitudes. I know I want to get rid of them, but how do I even begin? How do I know what my biased attitudes are? Often they're subconscious, right? So doing something like an identity web and starting to think about the places where we hold power is really helpful, because often the places where we hold power, that's where our unlearning needs to happen.
Great. So let's dive into talking with your child about racism. For many parents, this could feel like such a daunting task. And here I am, I'm one of your facilitators, but I'm also a parent. And I can honestly tell you that every time I have these conversations, whether it be with my students or my own kids, it still feels incredibly tricky and hard. And I'm constantly thinking about the words that are coming out of my mouth, and I still feel like I'm messing up. But regardless, I do feel strongly that these conversations are just absolutely necessary. So a lot can be said within 1 hour. Again, my colleagues and I try to keep it to 7 points to help guide you in your conversations with your children. And yes, I said conversations because this is not a one and done deal of a conversation. The idea is to start an open and ongoing dialogue. And let's take a moment also just to think about, why does this feel so hard for us as parents? I mean, for me, when I think about it, I just think about how parents are supposed to protect their children, right? It's one of our most sacred responsibilities as a parent. And so when you are opening up this can of worms and having their eyes open to, our past history, racism, any ism, any scary truths that are out there, that feels incredibly hard and it feels scary. But I want us to take a moment to really think about that there are children out there now who are connected to that painful history and who are connected to the current realities in which we live. And they do not have that privilege of being shielded from any of this, nor do their parents, who need to have these conversations early to help them and navigate them through all of this. And so for those of us who have a choice in this, of whether or not we engage in these conversations, I urge you to let go of that privilege and have the conversations that need to be had. Tell the stories that need to be told, so that as a parent, you can look at your child and say, this is our past, this is what's happening now, and now here's what we're going to do in moving forward. Here's how we're going to partner together and do our part. So the first point, again, was to consider your identity and to think about the places in which we hold power. And then as a parent, you're going to help your child to do that, to see who they are and who your family is, and think about how that connects to race and racism. And it's also vital that when doing this, that you also point out for them and identify and name their privileges, because that's also a part of their identity and your family's identity, if you do own these privileges. For myself, as my own parental growth, I realized not too long ago that, given my identity, I think I did a fairly good job of talking to my kids early on about how racism is going to affect them as Asian Americans. But it wasn't until recently that I really realized I need to do more about naming their privileges that they have. So I sat them down and been talking to them about what privilege looks like in their everyday life. Like when they go into a store, they're not getting followed. If we were to get pulled over, we're thinking about how much is that ticket going to cost, not thinking about the safety of our own lives. And the idea is the more that I can shed light to that for my kids, the more that I could get them to be aware of the privileges that they have, they then can see that these privileges should be owned by all, that they're really just human rights. And it then gives them a starting point of knowing the work that needs to be done. And as you talk about identity, you're talking about your own experiences, and those are your lived in truths. And it's our job as parents to remind our kids that that same thing goes then for everyone else around us, for those who are seemingly different, to also hear what their lived in truths are. And as parents, what we can model is opening up our own social network and fostering relationships with other people and hearing their life stories. And when you do that, what you're gathering is a collective truth of these lived in truths, and using that as our compass in working towards equity. And as my friend Michelle said, children notice race early, and so it's never too early. And what happens is, as parents, when we're too scared or when we're still trying to like figure out, okay, I'm not ready for this yet, but I'm going to, when we're putting a pause on this, what happens is that society then keeps doing the talking for you. I could tell you as a kindergarten teacher, these kids come into my classroom already filled with so many messages from their outside world of their own race and others. And, you know, they're getting it from the toys that they're playing with, the shows that they're watching, the books that they're reading, the conversations that they're hearing, both at school and outside in their communities. And so who's going to be doing the talking? That feels hard. But what's awesome about this is that you, as their parent, if you start having these conversations with them, your voice carries so much weight simply because you're their parents. And so that is an incredible power that you have that you can use and yield. And let's be clear, we are not promoting a colorblind world. We live in a world of color. We want to let our kids know that is beautiful and that is awesome and that we're all a part of that beauty. But at the same time, we're also showing them what people have done with those differences and how that has led to injustice. And so how do we talk about these things? You know, it's how we talk about anything with our kids. Sometimes it is going to be in the moment. You know, for example, if you were to see your child grab for a pair of sharp scissors, you're going to say something right then and there, because if you don't, there'll be consequences. Similarly, for those of us who have kids who are nearing the dating age, some of these conversations are going to be more proactively thought out and delivered. And that's the same thing when you're talking about race and racism. Sometimes these conversations are going to feel jarring and you're going to have to say something right then and there because you know your child just heard something or maybe they said something. And other times you're going to be more thoughtful as a parent of knowing I need to have this conversation with my child because there's just so much that you need to help them to see and understand in moving forward in this life. And so no matter the how, the when is that it's never too early. So when thinking about their age and their developmental stage, I can assure you that you don't need a teaching degree, you don't need a master's degree. What you do is you keep it relatable. So again, as a kindergarten teacher, what do I hear every 5 seconds of my life? I hear my kindergartners squealing, "That's not fair, but that's not fair." They know exactly what fairness looks like and feels like. And so I can use that as a parent and use that to talk about anything that's even really hard, like slavery or segregation. And I'm going to remember that I'm going to use words that they could understand. I'll consider their attention span and know that I don't have to fit everything in within one conversation. And I'm going to keep bringing it back to humanity because for most kids, that's what they understand, human feelings. Other relatable concepts beyond just fairness is being included and not being included, being taken care of and what it feels like when you're not taken care of, the impact of others, and again, just human feelings. And as a kindergarten teacher, we're not waiting for our kids to bring these topics up. I mean, if they do, then yes, there's our golden opportunity, right? But we're going to take a more proactive approach and find ways where we can just naturally insert some deeper conversations. So for example, in September in kindergarten, we start with something called the Me Study, like many schools around the nation do. It's a perfect time to talk to 5-year-olds about who they are and have them notice similarities and differences with one another. So within that topic, that is such an opportune time for me to talk to them about skin color. Why do we have different skin color? And then also what's going on in our world with skin color. And again, how people have used skin color that has led to inequity. It gives us that space to talk about those kinds of things and process together. Let them be able to talk about it and ask questions and hear from one another and learn about it in that way. Sophie's going to talk to you a little bit more of what she does with older kids.
So around the age of 9 and often earlier, kids are starting to hone their critical thinking skills, and they are starting to ask a lot of questions about their surroundings and critique it. And so current events can be a really easy and natural and engaging way to talk to kids that are a little bit older about things like race and racism. And I think I'm saying this, the slide says upper elementary, but I think this goes for middle school and high school age kids as well. Current events are always a really good conversation starter and a way to, like a material that can support you in that conversation. And so on the right side of the slide, you can see an example of something we did with our 5th graders. This is just the very beginning of a lesson where we started to talk about the protests happening in the name of George Floyd. And I want you to notice how the language is straightforward and clear and concise to allow the kids to sort of make up their own opinion about the topic. And one thing that we'll do is we'll try to give them many perspectives. And so this was just the beginning. We included in this lesson many different sources, and some of them were videos, some of them were images, some of them, like these ones, were like Instagram posts that were like an artistic representation. We try to show them multiple perspectives, because another thing that they're getting really good at this age is, or as they get older, is synthesizing. So taking information from multiple sources and drawing their own conclusions from those, from that information. And so we want to give them a chance to practice that too. And after we research and look at different perspectives and different sources, we always want to give kids time to process. And so we always ask them 2 really simple questions that can apply to anything you're talking about, really, which are what do you notice and what are you still wondering about? And that allows kids like a lot of room to sort of process what they've just taken in. And as parents or as adults in this situation, it's our role to help kids to analyze what they're viewing or what they're hearing and consider the why, asking things like, why do you think that happened? Just to encourage them to process.
So I firmly believe that we can talk about any topic with children in an age-appropriate way. And conversations about race and racism need to be open and honest ones, and really offer a full picture of history and experiences. And as Susan shared before, as parents, we really want to protect our kids from all the bad things that are in the world, but there are times when we must explain things to them that are painful or unfair. And as this comic illustrates, kids can tell when adults aren't being honest with them. And if we want kids to come to us with questions, we've got to give them honest answers, right? So establish yourself as someone that they can go to with questions. It's a really, really good thing when your child wants to go to you with their question before they go to Google or to a peer who may also be in need of answers. And when you're honest with your child, they'll be more likely to want to talk to you because they know they'll hear the truth. So if your child brings up race or skin color or differences or noticings, never change the subject, right? Never go, shh, right? That shh, that silence said something, right? That silence says, we don't talk about this. It says it's not important. Let's pretend it didn't happen, or no, let's pretend we didn't hear that. So instead, what you can do is take advantage of that teachable moment, because stumbling through a tough conversation is always better than not having the tough conversation at all. And a lot of times, silence in these situations really just means, this is hard to talk about, or, I'm not sure what to say right now. And so if there are things that your child brings up that that they brought up in the past that you do want to talk to them about, maybe, take some time to plan out the conversation or how you want to explain it to them, maybe jot down some key points. And also consider if there are entry points for you to talk about the strengths and resilience of the people that were harmed, or the bravery of the people that were allies. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you an example of how you can honestly explain a topic like slavery. So you could start out by saying a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, people from Europe went around the world to discover new places and new lands that they could call home. And even though there were people already living beautiful lives in these lands, they still took that land for themselves. And one place that they took over was America. And this was a time before there were roads, before there were buildings and stores. None of that was here. And they wanted to make all of those things. And so they decided that they were going to find strong and smart and hard workers to do the work. But unfortunately, they didn't want to pay them. And so what they did is they went to Africa, where they could find strong and smart and hard workers. And they kidnapped people and they brought them back to America. And after they were kidnapped, these people were called slaves. And these enslaved people were bought and sold to white people. And the people who owned them, they weren't kind to them. They wouldn't let them leave. They forced them to work, to build roads, and to take care of people's homes and farms, and to do all sorts of hard work. What do you think about that? And a kid will probably go, that's really unfair. And you say, yeah, I know, that is really unfair. And a lot of people that were enslaved worked hard to escape. And some of them were able to, but they all really, really wanted slavery to stop. And there were white people that thought that slavery was wrong too, and they wanted it to stop. And so what they did is they worked together. They worked together to end slavery, and eventually their hard work paid off, and they were able to end or abolish slavery. And even though slavery ended a long time ago, its impact is still felt by people today. And so, your conversation may need more language or less language depending on your child's age, their social emotional development, or their learning style. And remember, you don't have to give all the information at once, but it is so important to commit to continuing the conversation. Later conversations, might dive further into the details of enslaved people's pain and about how they were treated unfairly. And it's also especially important for older kids to learn about using person-first language. So talking about enslaved people as opposed to talking about slaves. And it is okay if it's not a perfect conversation, because it doesn't need to be, but something needs to be said, right? And your kids may ask you questions and you don't know the answer, and that is okay too. I don't know is a perfectly good answer. You can also say, that's a great question, and I'm so glad that you asked me. I actually need some time to think about the best answer for you, so let me think, and I'm going to get back to you soon. And then be sure that you actually do get back to them. Or you could say, that's a great question. I'm actually not sure. Let's go figure it out together. And don't worry about, wrapping up the conversation neatly, because, these conversations can be messy. And you could even just say, wow, that was such an important conversation that we just had. Thank you so much for talking to me about this. You can ask me questions about race anytime. And also, if you would like the opportunity to think, a little bit more about what to say in different situations, we're going to be having a more interactive workshop coming up very soon, where we're going to just be working through different scenarios and unpacking them and talking about how, you can speak up in the moment against racism and bias with your kids. And so just like we want our children to ask us questions, you should ask them questions too. Ask your child what they know. Ask what they think. Ask how they feel. And listen to what they say, right? Listen for myths, listen for misinformation so that you can address it. And the more you listen for what your child already knows, what they're concerned about, what they're unsure about or confused about, what they're afraid of, the more you'll be able to really help them to feel safe and to feel like their questions are welcomed. Because it's just so important for kids to feel heard.
So as Michelle said, part of monitoring your child's emotions is reminding them that they can keep asking questions and encouraging them to process out loud by asking them questions, so that, because the only way that you can really meet them where they are is by hearing what they're thinking. And sometimes they're internalizing that. And so you can ask them questions to help draw that out so that you know how to help them process. But monitoring your child's emotions before, after, and during the conversation is extremely important. And another way that we can take care of kids when we're learning about challenging topics is teaching them what's true, which is that for as long as there has been oppression, there has been resistance to oppression. And what I mean by that is, as long as people have been treated unfairly, people have pushed back against that unfair treatment. And we can show them examples from history of how that's happened. So an example of that that we use in my classroom is when we're teaching kids about the abundance of negative imagery of Black people during the Jim Crow era, we also show them a collection of photos that W.E.B. Du Bois took to showcase Black life in America in the 35 years after slavery technically ended. You can see an example of one of those images on the slide now. And we ask kids, so in this activity, we show them images from the Jim Crow era that are negative, like negative depictions of Black people, like think Aunt Jemima, depictions of the actual Jim Crow character from minstrel shows. And we ask them this question of, how do these images depict Black identity? And the students come up with a list of adjectives. Then we show them these images, and there are a bunch more like this one. And we ask them the same question: how do these images depict Black identity from around the same time period? And they come up with another list of adjectives, which you can imagine are much more positive. They come up with things like friendly, it looks like they love learning, beautiful, happy. And we're showing, we name for kids that what W.E.B. Du Bois was doing was creating a counter narrative, and that people are doing that all the time, and that we can search that out. Another way is that, well, kids can begin to feel helpless, just like adults can, when we are not balancing hope and pain. We tend to, sometimes we get caught up in like exposing things to children, and we forget about also teaching them about the hope and beauty and resilience. Michelle has also mentioned this previously. And one way to help kids handle conversations like these is to foster, to nurture their natural desire to help by talking about social action. I'm not going to get into that. There's another workshop on that later, exactly how you can do that, which you can join if you'd like. So it's important that we also do our own work alongside our kids. We can think of this as a parallel process. Like how would you know if something that your kid said is problematic? We only know by learning ourselves, and always like understanding that that process is never ending, and that we'll continue to learn always. And it's okay to say, like Michelle said, it's okay to say to them, like, I need some time to think about that. Even if it's 20 minutes or so, and come back to it. And I think sometimes it's really powerful for kids for us to say, even like, I got that, I said something that I am not so proud of, or that I had some time to think and I'm thinking about it differently now, and I want to talk to you about how my thoughts have changed, and that can be really powerful for kids too.
So what if it's your child that experiences or witnesses prejudice or racism? As Susan shared earlier, this can be one of the hardest things to have to witness or hear as a parent. So first, just try to stay calm. This will help your child to feel safe. Maybe take a few deep breaths just to give yourself a moment to respond more intentionally instead of reacting to the situation. Maybe you're with them when this experience of racism happens, or maybe they'll come to you and tell you something that happened to them, or something that they saw, or something that they heard. First, just say, I am so glad that you let me know. Thank you for telling me. And ask, is it okay with you if we talk about it? And remember, you're going to have your own feelings about their experience, but really try to avoid creating a situation where your child becomes concerned with taking care of you. And remember that adults also have many more years of experience than our children do, which is going to impact how we think and how we react to different situations. And so because, of our own history, we're just bringing a different lens to the conversation than our child. And so that's just important to be aware of. And so if your child experienced or witnessed racism or prejudice, name it. It is so important to name it. Say what that person said is racist and wrong. And for children of color, it's so important to take this moment to also interrupt the internalization of racism and racist messages. Just be sure that your child understands that the problem was with the thing that was said or that was done, and it's not with them. Because internalized racism is toxic. And this is just an amazing opportunity to just deflect hate away from your child. And you can do this by simply saying, sweetheart, there are some people in the world that believe things that just aren't true. And what they said about you isn't true. Ask your child how they're feeling. Say, how are you feeling about what happened or what they said or what you saw? And if they don't know, that's okay. They might share that they feel mad or sad or confused. Just validate those feelings. Let them know it can hurt our hearts so badly when someone says or does something that's racist. Or it can be so upsetting to hear words like that or to see something like that. And be sure to make space for them to experience whatever they might feel. And let them know that there is no right or wrong way to feel when someone treats you like that, or when you hear something like that, or when you see something like that. However you're feeling is okay. And so after you've had some time to talk with them and sort of unpack their experience, it's important to take time to think about what could be done better to prepare them if they encounter a similar situation in the future, and to talk this through together. And so think about, did they say something to that person? Did they tell an adult? Did they get or do they still need support in addressing what happened, even though the moment's already passed? Should they do something differently if this happens again? Right, so maybe, what you can do is help them to identify a safe adult at school or other environments that they can go to, and maybe even having a script ready. All right, so that they know that they can say something like, what you're saying is racist and that's not okay. And they know that they walk away and they go and tell a safe adult immediately. So whatever their response, I just really encourage you to make strategies of resistance and action a part of that conversation. And so how to take care of your child after you talk, right? Children may experience a range of emotions after your conversation, right? They may be upset, they may be sad, they might be confused, they might be just fine and want to go play. And that is all okay, right? If they're sad, remember that it's okay to be sad about sad things. And if they're ready to move on and go play, that doesn't mean that they're not, empathetic, compassionate little beings. Kids just process events and information so differently than adults do. But just be sure to watch out for big changes in their mood or the behavior, and just respond with extra support and hugs and just some time together so that your child feels extra secure. And also check in with them about how they're feeling and support them in expressing their feelings. And so to help this conversation with younger kids, you could have the different pictures of emojis like this. Have different emojis feeling different feelings, and just ask them, can you point to the emoji that shows me how you feel? And older kids might respond more to a feelings thermometer like this, that you can ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you're feeling great, and 10 being you are so angry you're about to explode. So what number are you? You can ask them, what color zone are you in? And also being sure to just point out the positive and supportive members of their community that also care for them and nurture them and who they can also talk to. And again, as we've said before, just remembering that these conversations are ongoing and just bringing it up regularly and checking in with your child and letting them know that it's okay for them to bring it up too. And so another way that you can take care of your child emotionally is to share stories and experiences of strength and humor, resilience and resistance. And if stories like this exist within your own family, share those. Right? Are there people in your family that fought for civil rights? Are there people that were white allies? How do people in your family treat people, and why? Right? Talk about what values are important to your family and share stories that show examples of how your family values and treats other people. And remember that every family is different, but every family has strengths, right? And so finding ways to share your family's strengths with your child can be a really empowering experience. And also, if this topic interests you, we are going to have another workshop coming up where you'll have an opportunity to really learn how to use your family's stories to build a sense of family and cultural identity and pride. So we have to take care of you too, right? So how do you take care of yourself after these conversations? Because these can be really, really heavy conversations. And so it's just important to find time and ways to take care of yourself. And you might feel upset or triggered or how in so many ways, and just be sure to allow yourself to feel your feelings. And it's normal to have an emotional experience or intense feelings following conversations about race and racism. And just be sure not to judge how you're feeling, just acknowledge it. And practice self-care, right? And remember, self-care looks different for different people. So, for you, it might be cooking, reading, doing yoga, singing, taking a walk, talking to a friend, taking a nap, whatever it is, just finding something that takes care of you physically and emotionally, mentally, and spiritually also. And take time to reflect. Think about the conversation. Think about what went well, what maybe didn't go so well, and what do I want to return to with my child? And you can maybe give yourself something that we call a glow and a grow, right? So a glow could be something that you think went really well, and a grow would be something that you hope could go better next time. So maybe your glow is, I actually said something in a situation where I usually don't. And a grow might be, next time I want to listen more and talk less. And be transparent. Share with your child what you do to take care of yourself and model self-care. You could say, when I think about racism or when I talk about it and I really think about how much it hurts people, it makes me feel sad. When I feel sad, listening to some of my favorite songs helps me feel better. Do you want to go listen to some music with me? Do you want to go for a walk with me or cook something with me? It can just be so fun and healing to do something with your child. And be sure to locate your own support network, right? And again, don't judge these conversations. Just be gentle with yourself and just remember you're doing the best that you can.
So what if it's your child that says something or does something racist? It can be incredibly upsetting and jarring when any child makes a racist comment or does something racist, and especially so, I think, if it's your child. Sometimes it might be a seemingly innocuous comment, and other times it might be, that it's a deep, hurtful comment that was meant to tear another person down. Both of those can be really challenging to manage, but both types of comments need to be addressed. And they need to be addressed immediately, because any kind of passing momentary silence could be misunderstood by your child as an act of condoning what they said or did. And it's crucial to address it in a way that clearly confronts the impact and the hurt that the comment or the action caused to the other person. And you can use this time as an opportunity to have a conversation to address your child's fears and correct any misperceptions that you can tell they have from that kind of comment or action. One of the best lessons I've learned as a teacher is to always start with questions. And that can be tricky because as an adult, if you hear a child say something hurtful, you might immediately jump to conclusions, but sometimes those conclusions are incorrect. And even if your child didn't mean what they said or did in a hurtful way, you will still need to address it. But it's important to start with questions because it may change the way the conversation goes slightly, depending on what you hear from them. So it's helpful to start from a place of inquiry. So in order to know how to address the situation, we need to ask questions. And on this slide are just a few examples of questions that might help you understand the context a little bit more and get at the root of what happened. So you could ask your child, what do you mean when you say that? Or why do you feel that way? How would you feel if someone said that about you? How do you think that makes that person feel? Or where have you heard that before? Just to get a little bit more context so that you can move forward. So once you have an idea of what questions to ask to open the conversation up and to understand more about what happened. How do we move forward beyond that? I think that's one of the hardest things, and one of the reasons why many people avoid conversations like these, because we don't know where to go from there. And I think there are a couple things that are really important. One is that we educate children about the history of racist words or terms that they've used. So something that I've said to my fifth graders before has been, that language that you just used has been used to dehumanize people, to make them feel or seem like they're less than human. And that kind of language has no place here. Just to like really cut to the chase and explain to them why it was not okay. And it's also important to, as I said, to communicate how hurtful those words can be, or that action was. And I think that you'll find that by talking about the impact, we really appeal to children's empathy, and every child is naturally empathetic. And I think we can build on that. I also think what I've found in my classroom is that kids feel really empowered when they know a way that they can actually have a concrete way to make the world a better place. So I have followed that example I just gave. I've followed that with saying something like, words are so powerful. They have the power to build somebody up or to tear somebody down. And so we want to use words that always build people up and make them feel honored and good about themselves. And that actually by using language like that, because not everybody does, by using language like that, we're actually making the world a better place, or making people feel like they have a place in the world. And it sounds cheesy, but it's true that kids are really excited to play a part in molding society in that way.
So now what? Let's say you've had these conversations with your child, and now what can you help your child to do? These next things are things that I wish more parents did when I was younger to help their child who might have hurt another child. And the work is twofold. The first is work within themselves, and you could help them do that as their parent. And the other is then, of course, taking care of that child whom they hurt. And so as parents, it's all well and good to help our kids see and understand the separation between the deed from the doer, right? We all are human. We're all going to make mistakes. But some of our mistakes can deeply hurt others. And so regardless of intention, it is so important that we help our kids to take full responsibility for their words or actions. And to borrow the words of my kindergartners, it would not be fair if we as parents just say, I'm sorry. It has to be more than that. It has to be more, because the hurt that they caused is deep. And so what you could help your child to do is to take the time to learn more about the history of the words that they may have used, or to really take the time to consider and understand why their actions were so dehumanizing. And of course, that we're not going to put that responsibility on the person whom they harmed, but that there's plenty of resources out there to help in that kind of work. And then the other is to then actually restore the care to the child whom they hurt. And it's important to center this next step on that child, and to really honor where they're at and what their wants and needs are at that time of what's going to help them to heal and to move on. And so it's your child's role to listen, to really just listen and own their part, and to apologize. And again, this is where parents a lot of times stop and think that, after I'm sorry, it's all good. But what we could help our children to do is to take that extra step. And this extra step is going to feel hard for your child, likely, but we have to remember how much harder it was for that other child on the receiving end. And so one thing that they could do is to share with them what they've learned and what they now understand, and share how things are going to be different for the future. And that helps them to be held more accountable. And it also helps the other child to feel some sense of reassurance of how the future is going to change with at least your child.
So if your child says or does something racist, it is vital to understand where these racist ideas are coming from. Because children only know what they learn from the world around them, right? All they know is what they're taught from the various people in their lives and what they see and what they experience and pick up in the world. And so because of this, we have a responsibility to be really critical of their environments and to talk back to it anytime its messages are hateful or harmful. So first, you need to be more aware of the things that maybe you're doing or saying or that are contributing to your child's experiences, because you as their parent are the most important model. And if you realize that your child is hearing or seeing racist or stereotypical or biased messages from family members or friends, you're going to need to confront them. Even if it happened years ago, it's still so important to address. And the racism might be overt, it might be subtle, but what's so important is to focus on what the person did, right? Not who they are. So you want to communicate to someone that what they said or what they did is racist and unacceptable. You're not saying that they're a racist. And you have every right as a parent to say that you don't want your child to be exposed to something that you think is harmful to them. And yes, it is impossible to control for everything that, in the world that your child sees or that they hear, that they're exposed to, right? But being more present, maybe being unplugged from devices when you're out with them, can give you more of an opportunity to just have more of an active role in the ideas and messages that they are exposed to. And so what if your child hears or sees something racist at the playground or at the bus or at a store or somewhere else? So important to speak up in those moments. Say, do you know what that word means? Or what do you think about what they're saying? You might even have to say, let's move to the other side of the park because the words that some of the kids over there are using are racist, and those aren't the kind of words that I want you to listen to. What they're saying is so hurtful and wrong. And then maybe after checking in with them about that, right, bringing it up again, saying, I'm still thinking about what happened at the playground. Is there anything that you're still thinking about? And if there are shows or movies that, have messages and images that you think are problematic, talk back to it. Have a critical conversation with the things that your children are consuming, right? When you're watching a show or a movie, wonder, what does everyone look like, right? What do the villains look like? What do the heroes or the heroines look like? How are different people talked about? Right? Whose perspective is being shared and whose is missing? And if you think that an ad or show or commercial shows someone in a stereotypical light, say it, right? Give your child a different perspective or a different opinion, a different way of looking at things. Because the journey of raising anti-racist children starts with all of us. And your voice as a parent is the most powerful and influential to your child. And as a parent, what you say and what you think and what you do impacts your child more than anything else. And what you don't say and what you don't bring up and what you don't talk about can have just as powerful of an impact because your silence says something too. So we'd like to leave you today with this final thought by Dr. Darnisa Amante. We can be perfectly imperfect. When you feel like you have no control over anything, you have agency over yourself and what happens in your own home. We all have biases. No one is exempt from that. And that is the inner essence of this work. We all have a role to play in uprooting racism. And in our homes and within our own families is somewhere that we can all begin. And so we really hope that, your time with us today has affirmed the conversations that you may have already started with your children or was helpful in, helping you to start these conversations at home. So thank you so much for being here with us today and for joining us in this work. And now Satpa will share some more information about our upcoming workshops.
Thank you so much to Michelle and Sophie and Susan for sharing their insights and thinking over the last over the last hour. On the screen, you'll see a list of some of the other workshops. You'll find those on our website. We've actually offered a lot of them, gotten fantastic feedback. It really offers an opportunity to do deeper work. This was sort of just like a high level intro workshop, and the next set of workshops is actually a smaller group, and it's more a workshop sort of setting, which is more of how we like to do this work. Webinar is not usually our mode of functioning. We like to talk with folks. So this next set is really about doing sort of our own work and digging into that work in a really explicit way. So we encourage you to join us. And we just encourage you to stay connected to us. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and we just encourage you to sort of give us a shout out, tag us if you do, and we would love to just continue to stay connected. So thank you all for being here. Such a pleasure to spend some time with you all.